Now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Stephan A. Hoeller, who is seated to my right. Dr. Hoeller is an American author, scholar, and proponent of esoteric traditions and religion. He's an author and scholar of Gnosticism and Jungian psychology, and the Regionary Bishop of Ecclesia Gnostica and the senior holder of the English Gnostic transmission in America. He has lectured in Australia, New Zealand, England, Europe, and the US. He is a national speaker for the Theosophical Society of America. Since 1963, he has been director of the Gnostic Society here in LA, where he continues to lecture regularly most Friday evenings. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephan Hoeller?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartok. And the first thought that comes to my mind is that, believe it or not, we at the Theosophical Society and Gnostic Society up on Beechwood Drive were the first ones who organized a memorial meeting on the anniversary of Mr. Hall's death. We did that on August 30th, 2015, and I just found a flyer for it. There were some difficulties going on here at that time, and so that's where we had it. And since then, it has become pretty much an annual event, and fortunately here, which is of course Mr. Hall's place. I many times remember him sitting probably in this very chair, which was upholstered by my dear friend who sits over there, who did all of our upholstering. There you are. And we certainly had a great many wonderful times here. Now, I need to make another announcement. I have brought a number of little small book-sized reprints of an essay that I wrote recently in Quest magazine, which is the Journal of the American Theosophical Society, about the American sage Manly Hall. And I gave them to my friend Madame Carmina, who can tell you where she displayed them, probably at the entrance. And those are my little gift to you. And they contain primarily reminiscences of mine of Mr. Hall with a connecting text. You know, I am now what may be called my anecdotage. I have lived now almost a year longer than Mr. Hall has. So I got ahead of him. Got ahead of him here on earth. He got ahead of me in another good place. So in any event, owing to the fact that due to the anecdotage, I have an almost irresistible tendency to slip into reminiscences and anecdotes about Mr. Hall, or just about almost anything else, or anybody else. I thought that I will attempt, whether successfully or not remains to be seen, but I will attempt to concentrate this evening primarily on what we might call Mr. Hall's heritage, namely what could be considered the principal line of insight and teaching that he has left behind us, behind himself, and probably eventually behind all the rest of us also, and which we can continue to carry with us into the future. Because the very word heritage comes from the Latin and indicates something that is left behind, something that is inherited. So I would like to concentrate on some ideas on what we inherited from Mr. Hall in terms of his wisdom, in terms of his insight, in terms of the spiritual directives that we can say that he left behind for our benefit. And then, no doubt, I won't be able to resist a reminiscence here and there, because that is an old age affliction that only a regression in age could remedy, which I am not able to accomplish. So then, let us say, what is it really in terms of a compendium, not only of ideas, because that's easy to come by, but a compendium of insights, of wise directives, of spiritual intentionalities that Mr. Hall has left for us. And when we look these over, then perhaps we may proceed, depending on the time, to other ancillary elements. Of course, it's pretty well known to everyone who knows anything about Manly Palmer Hall that his career began and indeed was crowned at a very early time, and that when he was a very young man, by a gigantic Magnum Opus, as we call it in Latin, a chief work. And this is what sort of en famille we used to always refer to as Mr. Hall's big book, and you know then of which one I mean. And in this work, he concentrated in word and image the majority of his insights into the esoteric tradition, which he catalogued in the title page of the book with all the Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Masonic, Rosicrucian, symbolic philosophy. By gum, I remembered it. Which is, of course, merely a statement in greater detail of the main elements of what increasingly came to be called the esoteric tradition. Mr. Hall, by the way, had said to us at one time that that is really the only important thing that I ever wrote. Of course, he wrote 150, by the time he went 160 books and various other smaller works, but he said that was the really important work, and that ever since then, as he said, I only wrote books on paragraphs of that book. It's a magnificent work, especially if you get hold of the large original edition, although there were two, but as far as I remember, two editions of the large format, the folio format. One, of course, the first one, and then the 50th anniversary edition later on, at which time I was here already, and of which he graciously presented me with a volume. In fact, there are two of his signatures in it. I bet you there are not too many people who have that book with two of Mr. Hall's signatures. The first one, with all the 50th anniversary edition, he signed all the copies. The second one was signed specially to me. So I have two manly halls gazing at me from the book. But as you may remember, it's a fabulous creation, very profusely illustrated, including a very large number of big color plates as well as smaller pictures. The color plates were all designed and executed by J. Augustus Knapp, K-N-A-P-P, a very fine artist who was quite friendly with Mr. Hall. I used to see Mr. Knapp occasionally on Sundays in Laguna Beach, because that's where he lived subsequently. And if you want a little technical advice, which you probably don't want, but I'll give it to you anyway, that's just the way I am, I give you an advice. The colored plates are more accurate reproductions of the original artwork of Mr. Knapp than the first edition. We had an exhibit at the library at that time where we had the various pictures, and we were able to compare them. And of course, by the time of the 50th anniversary of the publication of the book, well, the reproduction techniques had increased considerably, so they are really very much the way they were originally painted, and they are magnificent, as well as the many black and white drawings therein. Now, that's probably all you need to know about that book right now. There are several editions now, including the what still is left of the folio edition, and it is really a compendium of the esoteric tradition, and we might also say, therefore, of Mr. Hall's heritage. Now then, that's enough about that particular book. So let us say we need to, if we can, address ourselves now to this mysterious tradition that Mr. Hall became acquainted with when he was a very young man, and which he valiantly represented and put forth and publicized until virtually his last day. So what are we dealing with here? These are 19th century terms, esoteric and exoteric. The exo being outside, the eso being inside. They also have a relationship, perhaps psychologically, to the two attitudes of the human psyche, as put forth by C.G. Jung, of the introvert and the extrovert. So we might say then that there is obviously always a representation of exoteric varieties of what might be called the exoteric tradition in the world. All the world's religions, large and small, old and new, represent that. And why is that? Because the human consciousness requires a framework within which to move, within which to operate. In the times of the ancient mysteries, to which Mr. Hall was very greatly devoted, and of which he almost constantly recalled in his work, there was a one particular approach required approaches. If we were to be initiated to the Eleusinian mysteries or any of the others, you always had to practice this. And this was what in Greek was called theoria. And the theoria is the mental or intellectual explanatory material of the mystery. The mystery, of course, is something that I think St. Clement of Alexandria wrote that the mysteries are experienced mystically. Well, don't approach the mystery with your head only because you're going to go wrong, as indeed innumerable people have and do and will do. But in any event, so there has to be a theoretical framework within which the experience of the deeper worlds finds its place, its explanation, and its ready ability to be assimilated by the mind. Because mystical things are not terribly easy to deal with. You see, mysticism, all of that comes from the Greek word mystes, which means someone who closes his eyes, veils his eyes. The idea being that the initiates into the mysteries would withdraw their attention from the external, from the objective world, in order to see with another set of eyes, to see the sights that may be observed but inwardly within ourselves. And so that is, let us say, the first, well, if I may use such an expression from King Solomon's temple, and of those who are familiar with certain aspects of St. Solomon's temple, that this is one of the two great pillars, Joas and Jachin, as transport to the mysteries, is the theoretical, the intellectual understanding of a system of reality within which we can have experiences, especially experiences of a deeper nature. But then, of course, there is the other one. And the other one is the esoteric, or the interior mystery, that which we might say appeals to the introversion of the psyche in modern psychological terms, and that is experiential. That is not something that can be readily fixated in intellectual terms or depicted in pictorial terms or artistic terms or in any other but a deeper interior visionary capacity. Now, these two are always there in our experience, and these two constitute the operating mechanism on what became the esoteric tradition. The esoteric tradition, in that sense, merely implying that there is a tradition which addresses in an effective manner the interior experience. Because there are many traditions, all the intellectual traditions, all the mathematicians, all the philosophers are all dealing with their exoteric tradition. But there is something interior. Now you might ask, because we always like to have some idea of the origin of things. We always ask, well, where does it come from? And that's a It's a very difficult question to answer, but it would appear, if our suppositions are correct, it would appear that from the beginning of the life of the human race on Earth, there always was a segment of humanity in all parts of the world, of all nationalities, of all races, and so forth, which had a natural proclivity toward looking into the deeper, the transcendental side of life and of reality, which is reached, I don't like the word accessed. It's one of my greatly disliked words. I am not a computer. Okay? Hopefully you are not either. So let us say, wherein one gains access to these deeper regions. If any of you have the good fortune, for instance, to travel to the south of France and to the area that is the Alpine region of the Languedoc and around there, and if you gain access to the ancient caves, which are incredible in volume and size. I mean, in a little town in that region of Belvès, where we stayed for a number of days, we lived in a tower, they called it tower, and the lowest level of the tower is a sort of a sub-basement, and in that sub-basement there's a gigantic hole in the wall. So you ask me, what is that for? Well, that leads into the caves, and we advise you not to go there, because it's extremely easy to get lost. And there are probably the most ancient and most durable artwork of a transcendental inspiration in the world. The pictures of the ancient shamans of the Alpine region with the antlers of the deer tied to their head and wearing the animal skins and shaking rattles and scepters, dancing and dancing and dancing the dance of the gods. And these and similar relics of very ancient times tell us that there has been an interior, an esoteric, we might even say an ecstatic tradition for a very, very long time, wherein people experience unusual sights, unusual impressions, unusual visions, and possibly auditory experiences. This has always been there. Now, undoubtedly, such people were always in a minority. Why? Because most people were occupied with trying to make a living, one way or the other, by hunting the deer, and then they could give the antlers to the shamans, and so forth, and tilling the ground or whatever they could. They had external tasks that they felt that they had to address themselves to. And from the preoccupation with the external and the experience of the internal, there came about, let's say, this dual approach. When you, for instance, study the spirituality, especially of the ancient Greeks, then you will find that both of these approaches are there very, very close together. and that they supplement and complement each other in a wonderful way. It hasn't always been the same in subsequent historical periods and with other peoples. But the Greeks were either lucky or very smart in that respect, and as such they really became our intellectual and spiritual ancestors. As Harold Bloom, the great literary and religious critic, put it, that we are all children of the Greeks, because that's where our cultural roots really are. Now then, how did the Greeks solve this? They said, well, first you are what you are, whoever you are, maybe tilling the ground somewhere on one of the Aegean islands or so forth, and then as time goes on, you begin to experience some deeper things. What we now call your consciousness will be stimulated greatly, and then you will become what the Greeks called a hero. Now they had plenty of heroic people because the real Greek states fought a lot of battles with each other. You know, they didn't invent little battles among little states in the Ukraine. They definitely had them in Greece, but that's not the kind of heroism. But they became heroes of their souls. They exercised what the Greeks called heroic virtue, which is spiritual strength. And thus they reached a certain level of the human conscious attainment. And then they further pursued their insights into the deeper worlds and into consciousness, and then they became what the Greeks call demigods. Demi means half, you know, like a demijohn. Did you ever drink out of a demijohn? The John was apparently a bigger bottle. A demijohn is pretty big. And hopefully there's something good inside. You know. But anyway, the demigods and demigoddesses, you know, they were now reaching the boundary between human consciousness and something beyond human consciousness, a transhuman consciousness, an order. And as the result of that, they were partakers of unusual and helpful experiences, and they were able to communicate some of that to ordinary humans. And then there was yet another step, said the Greeks, and that was the gods and the goddesses. Where humans, by way of their expansion, their illumination of consciousness, their spiritual experiences, and their ensuing wisdom, were now in the process of joining or have joined the immortals. What were these immortals? Well, it's very difficult to tell. But they were, we might say, cosmic, transcendental cosmic agencies. We can sort of imagine how lovely it must have been for the average Greek citizen walking down the path near Mount Olympus, which was shrouded in clouds, and out of the clouds there comes the resounding laughter, the laughter of the gods. How nice it would be if we had something like that. You know, maybe we could declare the Hollywood Hills with a sign, Mount Olympus of Southern California. I live pretty close to them, sort of right underneath the letters. And then we could hear the laughter of the gods, and it would cheer us up. Oh, how much we needed that the last 2 years when we had the anger, the fear, the terror, and the nonsense not of the gods, but of humans spread all over everywhere. But take heart, things don't stay that bad. And if we are properly aspiring, then we shall also hear the laughter of the gods. Now then. And so in this, when the humans are able to join this transcendental realm, then they are very, very close, right in contact with a sort of nondescript, usually nondescript, but tremendously good, tremendously kind, tremendously insightful element of consciousness. The Greeks usually refer to it as the one, as against the many demigods and goddesses and so forth. Beyond it all, the one. In Egypt, as some of the Egyptologists discovered, the spiritual aspect of the god Amun, now not Ra, the eagle, but Amun, was regarded as the ultimate reality, the sovereign and supreme power of being. Now, the people who gained some access to this, who received some of this consciousness, and their disciples, and maybe their families, these are the people who were the members of the esoteric tradition. And this tradition went on, and it was practiced and appreciated and revered in the mysteries of antiquity, some of which endured for a very, very long time. I mean, the Eleusinian mysteries, which are the most famous, in all likelihood existed for several thousand years. Now that takes something, because it wasn't easily or readily accessible. Now then, as time went on, and of course various historical and societal changes went in everywhere, the esoteric tradition had to adapt itself. Sometimes, because of its numbers, its majority, the exoteric tradition became suspicious and hostile to the esoteric tradition. And that's when persecutions took place. That's where the unholy Inquisition had its origins and so forth. All those esotericists over there, who do they think they are? They think they know something more than we do, and so on and so forth. But it was always there, sometimes underground, sometimes visible, and as such, it was really the treasure of history. This was the balm of Gilead, and Mr. Hall sometimes used that term, which, knowing or unknowing, was really the healing and the sustaining agency of the various cultures. Even in such comparatively recently founded religion as Islam, to this day you find the Sufis, which just means those who wear wool, because the exoteric people, if they could afford it, were wearing silk, but the Sufis wore wool. I'm sure that you are immensely interested in and grateful for this information. You will never forget it. I had a long conversation once, probably I shouldn't mention his name, even though he is no longer among us, with a noted Sufi leader who came here from France. Maybe some of you know who I mean. And it was only the two of us. and he said to me, you know, we were here before Islam, and possibly we will be here after Islam. We had to accommodate ourselves to Islam in order to survive, but we have always been here, and hopefully we will always continue here. We were speaking in part in French, and I said to him that, Monseigneur, I certainly pray that that will be the case. So let's say some of the traditions have an awareness of their own esoteric twin. Now then, after that sort of lengthy and probably tedious introduction, let me go a little bit further. Let's say if we want to have maybe a good metaphor, which is also pictorial, is also to some extent known already because it occurs in a sacred scripture. The metaphor is that of the dream or vision of Jacob, which is really the foundation of the country of Israel. You may have thought that Israel was founded by Herzl and all the various leaders. No. Israel was founded by a dream. It was founded by a visionary dream. When, according to the Old Testament, Jacob lay down and put his head on a rock, and then he saw a stairway. And upon the stairways the angels ascended and descended. And then he was told that this is indeed the Beth El, the house of El, which was the name of the god at that time, and that this will be physically the home of the people of Israel. That is when Israel was founded, not in the 1940s. In any event, the stairway. And the stairway indicates that we have the capacity and indeed in some ways the duty at some point in our lives to begin climbing that stairway, not remain earthbound in the dirt, wherever that may be, but to begin to move into the heavens so that we can discover and practice there our higher, our transcendental nature, which in a quiet and in a dormant capacity was always in us. The great Madame Blavatsky, whom Manly Hall revered greatly, said at one point about the human that we are a being whose future has no limit to its glory and its wonder and its greatness. I am slightly paraphrasing Blavatsky's words, but that's what she said. And so, how can this be true? How can this be realized? It can be realized when we begin to exercise within ourselves both our determination and our capacity to begin climbing that ladder. This is what the French esotericists have called l'escalier des sages, the stairway of the sages, and which of course is represented in the sacred scripture as a stairway of the angels. So now how do we move on that stairway? Well, first of all, it has to have a foundation. It has to be firmly standing on a solid ground. Otherwise, just try it with a ladder and not have a solid foundation, and you and the ladder are going to fall down. So there has to be a solid foundation. And I'll try to explain in a few minutes as to how that translates into our terms, let us say. And from that foundation, that solid foundation, which is the physical world and the physical body, the next rung is different. The next rung is one of feeling, of emotion, or whatever we wish to call it. So now sort of a little bit of excitement enters our spiritual life. We begin to feel unusual. We begin to feel different. And by the different here, unlike so many times at the physical level, we don't mean feeling worse, but feeling better. And so now we begin to exercise the function of consciousness, which is feeling, and by way of that feeling begin to orient ourselves in the inner world of consciousness. We are attracted to ideas, to experiences of various kinds, which make us feel good. We are attracted to art. We are attracted to music. We are attracted to beautiful and elevating rituals and theater. And a whole gamut of experiences which stimulate our feeling nature, our emotional nature. And then, well, how about some of the other rungs of the ladder? Then we step perhaps, once we have, we begin to get the feeling that feeling is not enough. You know? And there must be something else. There are all kinds of interesting experiences here. Makes us feel excited, makes us feel good, makes us feel curious, and whatever. But there must be more than that. And in that more, there is one particular factor. Feelings are all well and good, but do they have any meaning? I dare say that maybe a very little at times. So now the consciousness begins to seek meaning. And in so doing, it now moves into the thinking function. So we now seek meaning with our consciousness, with our mind, with our thinking function, and we avail ourselves over a period of time of various intellectual disciplines wherein we hope and expect to find meaning. And up to a certain point we do quite well. But as you know, on all of these rungs of the ladder, even though we have found what we consider to be some satisfactory meaning, we have discovered concepts and precepts of various kinds. We have developed intellectual disciplines, sciences, philosophy, and others. As time goes on, we can say with Goethe's Faust, and I'll bore you with a little bit of German perhaps, because that's how I learned the Faust. After hearing, this is at the very beginning, in the very first scene of Faust, where he says that even I have learned theology and philosophy and science and medicine and all of that, but then he says, hier stehe ich armer Tor und bin so been so doomed as before. That was the way I put it. Here I stand, I poor fool, and I'm as stupid as before. So, we work our way through various intellectual pursuits and exercises, and of course the world offers us inducement. Oh yeah, you will get a doctor's degree. Oh yeah, you will get, well, the way it is now, they won't even say you get a chair at the university, but you be a chair. You heard that? He's the chair of the religion department. Really, can one sit on him? The foibles of language are becoming really weird. But in any event, you will get all kinds of rewards. And with all those rewards, no doubt they will make you feel good to a various extent here and there, but ultimately, again, you will be still lacking something. I have met, and probably you have met, some frightfully learned people. And when people get very learned, they are frightful. There's no doubt about it, but very learned people. But when you work with them and explore their situation and their statements and their mind and their aspiration, you found out that all that learning didn't bring them happiness. Most likely, even though we use that word, the bluebird, the famous bluebird of happiness, it did not bring them meaning. And therefore, often, the more people we send to school, but of course it also depends as to what they learn in school. When we send them to school, they learn a lot of data. They learn a lot of book knowledge, but they have not become more imbued with meaning. Their lives are still meaningless, and we need to keep that in mind. So for just a tiny little example from the last few years, when we don't allow children, young people, to interact with each other at a personal level adequately, we deprive them of the discovery of a certain kind of meaning. Why? Because the combination of mental and emotional forces that we enjoy with each other, whether we are 7 years old or 70 years old or beyond that, like I am. But the stimulus in the psyche brings in the forces of meaning. And all of a sudden, in the midst of being with each other, in the midst of having a good time, in the midst of conversing, in the midst of having various emotionally charged experiences with each other, all of a sudden a light arises in the mind. Aha, I discovered some meaning. Aha, my life really means something, because a great deal of meaning arises as the result of the interaction of people with each other. We are social beings, and while certainly we interact with nature, we interact with animals and so forth, we have to be careful, as the philosopher Gerald Heard, whom I was very fond of many years ago, nobody knows about him anymore, a great friend of Aldous Huxley and an expatriate British philosopher of, I think, very great wisdom. Anyway, he said at one time, Be careful of getting into the frame of mind where you say that the more I see people, the more I like dogs. When you get to that point, something's gone wrong. And I think that Mr. Hoeller had a dog, at least at one time. So it's not that he disliked dogs. We need to keep these issues in mind. So as we take these steps, now we have taken the step into the mental, into the thinking region, and it has undoubtedly benefited us a great deal. It has brought us satisfaction, because the human has a tendency, at least in this particular vast period of history, whereby I mean thousands and thousands of years, to gravitate to thinking. In fact, the linguists will tell us that the very word man, which initially is like the German Mensch, a generic term, it's not a term of any particular gender about which people fight now, but the very word man is related to the Sanskrit manas, which is the thinking principle. So the man, the human, is someone who can think. It's maybe something to think about a little. But let us say, even with the exercise of our thinking principle, whatever we may call it, eventually a vacuum, a psychological vacuum sets in, which is largely owing to a lack of meaning. Because data, information do not bestow meaning. And that's the trouble with our electronic age. We can get so many data that they fill all the oceans. But these data will be just data. They will just statements of fact and idea, but they will not bring us any meaning. Because none of the steps on the step ladder that we are climbing now, from the vision of Jacob, none of these steps on the step ladders bring us hardly anything from beyond themselves. They can only offer us what is on their particular level. So when your mind is concentrated on physical things, then what will come to you is knowledge, or at least ideas about physical things, but not more. And all the various stories of people who made a tremendous amount of money, very wealthy people, and they are not enjoying their wealth, is because their consciousness was fixated at the physical level. And there are similar situations as we go on. So now, hopefully, we take another step. And this step is a very curious one. I think a lot of people don't recognize it when it happens to them. A lot of people don't even really associate any kind of meaning with the word. But this is called intuition. Intuition. It has a relationship to feeling, because when you have an intuition, it feels like you're having something, you know. And for this reason, it's very stimulating. For this reason, a lot of people who invented various important objects, mechanisms, and so forth, and otherwise have discovered things. The discovering people have touched their intuition, and that is always a very rewarding experience. And through the intuition already some little glimmering hope, some little light filters into our personality. It may not be a great deal, but an unearthly light has come. And this is what the great discoverers and great inventors usually say. I knew a few musicians, I knew some others who sometimes the compositions came to them in their dreams when they were asleep. Oh, say I had a dream and then I wrote it down, and so forth. And obviously the workings of intuition. So this has the capacity to enrich the consciousness very, very greatly. Yet the most intuitive people, at least the ones that I have known, and the ones that we read about and so forth, it is still, they have a recognition that there is still something missing. And what is missing is to a very large extent the meaningfulness of their lives. Now, I think it was Jung or one of his disciples who said that most people ask the wrong question about this. The question that they ask is, what is the meaning of life? He said that's wrongfully asked. What you ask is, what is the meaning of my life? Because it's an individual, it's a personal matter. And so are really all the other functions of consciousness. And if I can, let's say, answer that meaningfully, then maybe I'm coming close to a greater acquaintance with the meaning of life. All right, are we at the end of the ladder? I'm really happy to tell you no. Because now we come to many of the great myths, poetry, Arthurian legends and so forth. There is very often the symbolism of a bridge of one kind or the other. Now a bridge, it's more of a bridge than a step, but it's still moving out. So what is that bridge? That bridge leads beyond itself and beyond all the lower rungs of the ladder. That bridge is what the ancient Greeks, who haunt me for some reason tonight, the ancient Greeks called the nous. And by nous is meant a sort of a spirit, something that leads to very great and very transcendental experience. It is the bridge into reality. It is the bridge into real meaning. It's very difficult to explain, but every once in a while in your life you have an experience of that sort, and it's very different in kind from all the other experiences that you had. It's just a different species, a different genus, and it begins to convey what you have been looking for, knowingly or unknowingly ever before. What you are looking for is meaning. And through the nous now you enter what in Greek was called pneuma, in Latin is called spiritus, and in most of our languages still spirit, in German Geist, which is the highest rung, is the top of the ladder, and when all is said and done, this is what you have been inadvertently, unknowingly, and often mistakenly seeking all along. And then you are perhaps on Mount Olympus, as the Greeks would call it. Maybe you have joined the company of the gods and the goddesses. Maybe you are just on the borderline, but you have arrived. This is what you were seeking since the moment that you were conceived in your mother's womb. This is what you were seeking before you managed to come into this world, and then after that at every different step. Now, to have a notion of this, and to have the capacity and the help, which it often requires, to move along this path on the ladder of this transformation. This is the essence, the practical essence of the esoteric tradition. Everything else is confined within this. Now I can sort of see the little bubbles arising above your heads. That's sort of one of my jokes. You've seen those cartoons? You have a balloon over the head of people, and there are written things like, well, what the heck is he talking about? I thought this was going to be something interesting, and it isn't, and things like that. But this is the path of initiation. This is what was accomplished in the mysteries, certainly of the Mediterranean antiquity, but in its own way everywhere from the ice, from the North Pole to Tibet and beyond, all the spiritual processes which bring more consciousness and consequently more meaning are based essentially on a pattern like this. And now then, now comes the issue as to what is the result now. The result of it is a mystery. You have entered the mystery and you have become the mystery. The result of it is that you have, whether you know it or not, really and truly joined another kingdom of being. This is what in the Hindus call the great souls, the Mahatmas, the Buddhists call Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, and there are all kinds of names for them, and undoubtedly some of the great saints of Christendom and of other religions. This is what it is. This is where the potential now has come to be realized. But you may ask, well, what about all the other things that we read about in esoteric books? What diet are you to follow? Are you to become a vegetarian? Do you reincarnate a good many times? Do you worry yourself blue in the face over karma? Your karma, of course, not somebody else's, and things of that sort. All of these things. And the answer to it is, well, if you want to go into those things, you can, but they're frills. They're not really very important. That's why all the hundreds and hundreds of lectures that Manly Paul Mahal gave him, I never heard him give advice about things of that sort. I had a couple of Mexican lunches with him, which were not vegetarian. And we both had a margarita. And moreover, when he came from his house, whether he came here, see, now I'm flipping back into Reminiscences. You see, when he came here or before this auditorium was built, Mr. Hall spoke every Sunday morning at the campus theater down on Vermont. It was a nice old movie theater right across the street from City College. And I was very young, I was sort of kinetic. So I was walking along in the parking lot and nosing around and saying, Mr. Hall would arrive in the car and driven by his friend Gilbert Olson, and right in front of him in the ashtray, a nice big briar pipe, and it was smoking. It was something coming out of there, and not only that, but he had searched information among scholars and anthropologists and things of that kind, for instance, as to how beneficial to the, what now they call native Indians of the American Indian peoples, their peace pipe was. And he sort of indicated, folks, maybe we ought to learn from that. And it doesn't have to be a cancer-causing cigarette, but how about a good pipe, like his? The reason I bring these issues up is because details of lifestyle, details of commandments, you better do this and you better don't do that, or else your karma, if not the devils are going to get you, karma is going to get you. So this sort of thing was never heard from the mouth of Manly Hall. So what was heard? What was heard was what I tried to describe here this evening, maybe the slow but still effective climb on the ladder of the sages, on the ladder of Jacob. General principles which everyone could understand. Very understandable, very happy conditions. And the motivation for people, well, maybe just to put it that way, to do better, to be wiser, to be kinder to each other, to spare each other's life and spare each other's feelings, to have good families and things of that sort. You never heard Mr. Hall say, you all got to go to Harvard. Well, he hasn't been to Harvard himself, or to Yale, or heaven knows what other place full of Ivy Leagues, Ivy everywhere, including in the heads of the people. Inside. On outside you can have a nice Ivy crown. So the thing was, Mr. Hall's endeavor was to put forth spiritual principles which were conducive to the discovery of meaning, to the rise of consciousness, to the refinement of the soul, and goodness, let us say, in that sense, in every single lecture. Place was really full of people, and when people walked out of here, at least I had the feeling by looking at them, yes, you came here and you got something, and now you're taking it home, and it certainly was the case with me. And this is very, very important, because when all is said and done, all of these things that people think are so terribly important, your diet, the pills that you take, the masks that you wear in certain conditions, at the time of the masquerade. You got to remember, I come from a country where every winter for about a month, sort of right after New Year's until Lent, there were masked balls everywhere, you know. But you know, our masks were here over the eyes. So I don't know, maybe you want to communicate that to Dr. Fauci. Maybe the next masks will be over the eyes. However, I understand he's leaving his job, so you'll have to communicate it to somebody else. But let's say you need none of these things. You know, you shouldn't wear any leather shoes, whatever the case may be. And of course, now you shouldn't drive your car, and a whole bunch of things like that. You never got that sort of thing from Mary Palmer. What you got was inducement to come a little closer to meaning, and to employ that meaning in a meaningful fashion. And to realize that when you do that, I mean, that becomes a habit with you, you are going to have what generally is called a much better life. That a happy life is a good life. And along with that, the things that he demonstrated. I mean, I wrote in a little essay, which I hope that you will pick up, that he was not only a gentleman of the old school, but that he was a gentleman of the perennial school of goodness and of good and kind behavior. And he was like again, I'm reminiscing, you know, but he was like an embodiment of good manners and of polite behavior, no matter what was going on. Now he could be sad, and I saw him sad when his two vice presidents, Dr. Henry Drake, who was my particular patron because he brought me here to lecture, Dr. Henry Drake, and the subsequent vice president, Dr. Irving, all died. Mr. Hall was sad. But Mr. Hall may have been sad, but he was never pushy, he was never unkind, and he was never unmannerly. Not ever when it was in sight. And these things, I think, are very, very important. Now, Mr. Hall always spoke for an hour and a half, but I don't know whether I'm going to follow him at this particular time, because that may no longer be a custom here either. But I need to bring up something that I consider is of vital importance. And I have so far tried to indicate steps in transformation, as some people call it, the way in which we come closer and closer to the greatness of the Spirit. And I think that that is, of course, of absolutely crucial importance to recognize that that exists and that it can be done. But now I need to turn our attention for a brief time to something that is still part of that picture. I said that there has to be a good solid foundation for that ladder. Otherwise, the ladder will fall. And if you're on it, then you're falling. Now, that foundation is something that must exist in society, in family, in company. And what is it? It's the reliance on the existence and the helpfulness of a cosmic order within which we live. If you don't want to call it cosmic, it's too much of a New Age expression anyway. But let us say we have to be aware, first of all, that all of this stuff that we are involved in here is connected with something, that there is a higher source. And this source is the source of meaning. This is the source of the spirit. That if this ultimate source of meaning is not recognized, then we are depriving ourselves of something very, very, very important. I'm bringing in my other saint, in addition to Mr. Hoeller, namely Carl Jung, and this is factual because it's in documents. When the two American gentlemen, I believe they were both Americans, approached Carl Jung that they were about to start a new organization. And the new organization was to be called, and came to be called, Alcoholics Anonymous, the two big A's. Dr. Jung read the prospectuses that they wrote about the method and so forth, and he was quite interested in it. And then he wrote back to the gentleman who sent him this, and he said, "One thing I did not see in your letter, you did not mention God. You did mention a higher power. He says, if you don't include reference, active reference to the higher power in your program, you are not going to succeed in what you are trying to do." And they did. So I think this judgment can be included, shall we say, in our conversation. There has to be a recognition of something that is greater, that is more meaningful, that is more compassionate, and ultimately more effective than we are. You can call that something anything you want. As a friend of mine once said, if you don't want to call it Bob. Yeah? Start praying to Bob. What the heck? Yeah? But there must be a recognition of a higher power. Because when that is not there, then everything sinks down to a uniform gray mass without much to recommend it. So there it is. That is the most important. And everywhere you go, I mean, I used to be a kind of a short-tail professor of religion for a number of years, and I have not seen a religion or a religious cult of any kind that did not recognize a higher power. There is no secular religion. And if you take my word for it, and some of you probably won't, there is no meaning to life at a purely secular level. There isn't. You may think there is. Oh, I'm going to have meaning by caring for the poor. I may get meaning by caring for dogs and cats. I may get meaning by caring for the forest. Ultimately, you will be as bereft of meaning as you were before. Why? Because the very essence of meaning is psycho-spiritual. It is transcendental. It is beyond this world. And it is beyond the ideas and the pursuits and the emotions of this world, although they all can funnel into it. And along with that, as it usually goes, we also have to grow up with some set of reasonable, intelligent, and ultimately helpful rules. If we don't have any rules, if we intend to and will lead a lawless life, we are going to come to grief. There has to be order. to our actions, and to our thoughts, and to our feelings. If we don't have an orderly psyche, then that meaning and other transcendental elements which may come to us will not find a place. An orderly mind with a conscience, with a concept of what can be done, should be done in life, and what doesn't, will not work. Neither the esoteric nor the exoteric tradition will work in a disorderly and secular society. It may look like it's working up to a point, but it will come to various great crashing halts. And therefore, if you have any children, if you are going to have any children, if you have any influence on young people in one way or the other, and so forth, keep these things in mind. An ultimate reality, a transcendental power, a greater power than the earthly power on the one hand, which one can address and which one can have some kind of relationship with it, and order and meaning in our lives. Now, maybe I'm just an old pessimist who has seen too much and heard too much and so forth, because that's what happens. But let us say I see very little of these two requisites in our present society. I think that a society that is totally secular and that has torn itself away from the greater power, from the transcendental power, is like a plant that has been torn out by its roots. Because as Meister Eckhart and the other great mystics, particularly Eckhart, pointed out, the divine is our ground. It is the spiritual earth out of which we grow. And if we are deracinated, which means torn out by the roots, then we are going to wither and die. And we are going to wither and die not just as individuals, but as a society. Because as Alan Watts, who was very, very dear to me, and whom, I think the second time I heard a lecture by Alan Watts was right here. And he smoked a lovely little cigar of the peace pipe, you see. But as Alan Watts put it at one time, he says, every society that endured for any length of time was saturated by and dominated by spiritual things and by religion. No society survived without it. Well, they tried it in the Soviets. Of course, they compensated for it with gulags and things like that. Real great compensation, I'm sure. I lived under it, not in the gulag, thank you, but otherwise. But so these things are important for us collectively and individually, and to try to correct such tendencies, to prevent them from happening, to induce into the consciousness of people correctives to these. To this end, Manly Palmer Hall was dedicated. And that is why he was here in this room and in the other room twice a week, giving his long and wonderfully structured lectures, because he felt that a disciplined spiritual life is what people needed, and he tried to convey the various elements of that and the need for it. Well, I'll just throw in a little image which will be meaningful to some of my people whom I call brethren. Yeah. At a certain important place that we are familiar with, in a certain important room, let us say, above the most important place in an important room, there is a big G. What do you think it stands for? Oh well, I have people make jokes that it stands for geometry, but it stands for God, and for the God that geometrizes. And so the presence in the public mind, the presence in society of a transcendental being and of transcendental meaning is an absolute necessity, which if it does not return to our country, we are in deep and terrible and lasting trouble. And to possibly the prevention of that kind of trouble, Manly Palmer Hall was dedicated, and maybe we might learn something from him. In any event, another wise man, Jiddu Krishnamurti, said one time, in all the world there are only two kinds of people, those who know and those who don't. And what do the knowers know? The knowers know that there is meaning. The knowers know that there is spirit. The knowers know that there are states of being and consciousness and awareness and glory and love and light beyond the ones that we see before us, but that we can become partakers of it, because in it is a potential in that direction. We are capable of joining the kingdom of the gods and goddesses like the Greeks have. But we must be there to do it. We must take the steps of the ladder of the sages, and in so doing, look, even if you get a tiny little glimpse of what is beyond that ladder, you will have experienced happiness, you will have experienced satisfaction and joy and meaning of a kind that you never imagined exists, because such things do exist. And in every age there have been people who experienced them and who were able to teach them to others. And we are here in the hall, and God, give me, I am sitting in the chair of someone who knew all that and who knew how to convey it to people. May we become worthy of his work, of his memory, of his spirit, and may we try to do just a little bit of what he did. If we can do that, then all will be well. If we can't, things will not be well. It is up to us to choose. And meanwhile, thanks and gratitude and glory to our great teacher, whom some of us have seen here and experienced, and whose power and whose insight and whose message, whose legacy is still with us. And as long as we appreciate it, it will continue to nourish us, to inform us, and bring us eternal meaning and eternal joy. Thank you very much.